Richard, I've got a question. It's an observation that I've got about coming to meetings or non-duality meetings, and so there's the sense of self or me, or there's the battle with reality that happens by being a me here. But then when I come to non-duality meetings and I listen to this, it seems to drop away. That's the experience I get. But then when I go back out there, and maybe it'll come back again. Do you know? So I was wondering if you want to comment on that observation.
Well, first thing that comes to me is I think that's reasonably common. It's reasonably often reported. It's one of the reasons some of us like going to meetings on non-duality. The next obvious thing to say is that it is by no means universal. Any response is possible, and of course some people come to non-duality meetings and sit there feeling enraged. And maybe don't come back again, or maybe come back again to make trouble, or whatever it might be. I'm tempted to say that there's a resonance there. You know, it sounds pretty obvious there is a resonance there. But I'm tempted to say it, I have said it, there's a part of me that's slightly reluctant to say it. I think hopefully for obvious reasons. Ramana Maharshi's well-known phrase comes to my mind, you know, that your head is in the tiger's mouth. That's really all I can say.
Mm.
You know. You apparently find yourself at meetings on non-duality, and there is this experience. There's clearly a resonance.
Mm.
Somebody else would have walked out after 10 minutes. I've had people walk out after 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I've seen it. People do get enraged, like you say.
Absolutely. People can get, I think people can get enraged for some very obvious intellectual reasons, because this can be such a challenge. This can be such a challenge to some very dearly held principles and beliefs.
Mm.
And sometimes maybe, again, it's kind of a bit incautious of me to go into this territory, maybe sometimes it's an energetic thing.
Mm.
I mean, any of us can sort of go into a certain kind of atmosphere or meeting, an event, and kind of feel uncomfortable and not know what it's about. You just know that something about, you know, the energy of the psychophysical organism that still exists as long as we're alive doesn't match the energy of the event. I once went with a friend to a meeting of the New Kadampa Buddhists. It used to be known as Manjushri. Interesting group. I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time they were probably one of the, I think they were definitely known as the fastest growing Buddhist group in this country. They sort of grew astonishingly fast. And then they changed their name to New Kadampa Buddhism. And they were having a meeting in my town, so I went with a friend to check them out. At the time we were members of a kind of small local Buddhist group of a different persuasion. And I can't explain it, but you know, we sat there and we listened to the talk and we meditated, and we both felt like this really isn't for us. Have no idea why. Nothing, no intellectual stuff about it, nothing mental at all. Very nice bunch of people, very warm, very welcoming. Provided tea and biscuits, but there's just something about it. And we both had the same response. No, we're not going back. It's, you know, it's just a sort of very individual thing where we feel comfortable.
Okay, the biscuits, or was it?
They were all right. I mean, you know, they were okay. I mean, obviously this is the important thing. Yeah.
I think got thrown out today.
Thrown out? Oh, do tell, what for?
Because they're very much into the what's his name, the head of the organisation.
Yeah.
And we can't buy any other books but his. And she was trying to tell somebody about Buddhism quietly. And said, no, that's no good, you've got to buy these books. And the one I'm not going to. And then she started talking about Dalai Lama, and of course that was it.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
No, there are daggers drawn with the Dalai Lama.
Invited to leave.
I'm not surprised, yeah. I was actually at a meeting that the Dalai Lama was holding live. I heard him saying this with these very ears of mine, that their practices threatened his life. It was very dramatic. Yeah. So who knows? I don't know. It's just, there's energies. I mean, the point I was making out, my friend and I, is that we were actually at the time members of another small Buddhist group, so it wasn't like anything to do with an antipathy towards the Buddhist teachings or anything like that. It's just a kind of something completely evanescent, something beyond the mind we were reacting to. So obviously there are energies, of course. Yeah. Somebody raised this, I think, I don't know if it was last month, somebody raised this, the kind of, I mean, this is of course heresy here. This is the worst heresy here, to suggest cause and effect between going to non-duality meetings and the possibility of awakening. But I think, if it was last month, I think they said, well, if we are going to ascribe cause and effect, I mean, we're on very, very thin ice if we do ascribe cause and effect, but if we are going to ascribe cause and effect, it's just as likely, if not more likely, to be the other way around. It's not that going to non-duality meetings may cause awakening. It seems to me at least as likely, if not more likely, that the fact that the system is somehow getting ready for awakening. I know these are heretical words. Forgive me for that. It seems just as likely that the fact that the psychophysical organism is getting ready for awakening takes us to the meetings. In other words, if you like, if there is cause and effect, we're at the meeting because awakening is about to happen, rather than awakening happens because we went to the meeting. I mean, both of those are just stories and are equally nonsense.
Well, we should get back to there being no one, and there's no one here, and I didn't come. You know, this is here, supposedly, sort of.
This is
without choosing to come.
Yeah.
You know, this is here.
Yeah. This is it. This is all there is. This is here, and no one chose to come here.
Whether or not this is being readied.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, what I just said, I hope I managed to get across, was kind of nonsense, but no more and no less nonsense than the alternative, which is often posited. Yeah. I mean, the fact is, this is, if I say this is it, this is the only possibility. And here we apparently are. No possibility that this could be any other way. And in that, it's possible that all questions about cause and effect and path and practice might dissolve.
I do sometimes have quite a big belly laugh when I realise that nothing could ever have been in any way different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Including the worry and the mad mind.
Yeah.
So, this does an almighty good job at simulation, though, doesn't it? Time, simulating time, simulating continuity.
Yes, because of consciousness. It is a weasel word, a difficult word, but I'll use it for this moment, yeah. I mean, in a sense, I mean, to say there is no time is in a sense, sounds lunatic. Of course there's a time, of course there's past and future. You know, I set out from my house to come here today some hours ago, etc., etc., etc. In another sense, to say there's no time is kind of blindingly obvious. You know, that there is only this. You know, there is no past. I'm being very careful how I choose my words and my verb tenses there. There is no past. There is no future. No one in this room has ever experienced 1 second of the past, nor will experience 1 minute of the future. Everything is always, eternally, just this. So to assert that there is no time sounds like, on the one hand, both inconceivable folly, and on the other hand, blindingly obvious, in a way. But what we're really talking about here is the actual seeing of this, in a sense, bugger what the mind thinks about either of those propositions. To assert there is no time is folly, to assert there is no time is very sensible and obvious. But in a sense, bugger both those propositions. Because what we're talking about here is just the direct seeing that this is it. And how many times have we heard all sorts of people say that, or read all sorts of people say that? This is it. This is the only phenomena in existence. In even a split-second awakening event, I mean, the mind can't explain this or even understand it. All it can do is describe it in some way. In even a split-second awakening event, it's seen that there is literally nothing happening. This is literally an empty show. Some people reach for the image of a hologram. That's not a bad image, because a hologram is kind of like everyday experience, except somehow it's empty. And that's probably as good as an image as we can reach for. Even a split second of seeing, it's seen that this is an empty show. Having been a little bit rude about the New Kadampa Buddhists, perhaps now I should balance things up by acknowledging that Buddhism is very good at noticing that. Buddhism is very good at describing the emptiness of everything.
Richard, I guess in a way it's kind of anthropocentrism, if that's the, humanocentrism.
Yeah.
We think that our viewpoint has some inherent value.
Yes.
And for there to be value, there also has to be no value. So it doesn't really stand on much.
Yeah. And it's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable, of course, that we have the viewpoint we have. If you want to get a bit more sophisticated about it, of course, those viewpoints vary enormously depending on other things, like the culture we're brought up in and so forth. So we can never be separate from that given viewpoint. And when the self collapses, that kind of becomes irrelevant. Doesn't matter anymore. I mean, a lot of people fight against and strive against the viewpoint that they feel they have, and that causes a lot of stress. In the seeing of this, in what we're talking about here, it's possible. It's never more than a tendency. It's possible that that striving and that resistance may drop away, because it doesn't matter. Whatever viewpoint, I mean, just like everything else, whatever viewpoint is arising is arising. This chair is arising, the sound of a voice is arising, a viewpoint is arising. It's all empty. None of it matters.
That kind of alludes to the conclusion that you have no choice.
Well,
Why would you argue against?
it's not that you have no choice, it's that there is no one. There is such a gulf between they seem as if they're quite close or very close together, but actually there's such a gulf between you have no choice and there is no you who could have a choice. You have no choice posits the existence of a person who is powerless, a person who is subject to all sorts of things, maybe a person who is subject to destiny, or to God, or to fate, or to the will of their spouse, or something like that. You know, you have no choice. It's absolutely so different from what's being said here. There is no one. The question of choice doesn't even arise when it's seen that there is no one who could exercise choice. They're a million miles apart, those two.
Seems that it's basically there is no self, and the rest of this 3 hours is just commentary.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no point to this meeting anyway, but if there were a point to this meeting, it would have been covered in those first 20 seconds. Of course, there is no self. Now let's all go home.
What's it like in the no self? And what does it look like from that perspective in the no selfness? Yeah, it's
Yeah. Maybe the language and the questions and the speaking is over. Maybe it's just an excuse for us to enjoy the energy, if we enjoy the energy. Okay, good luck with your journey.
Thank you.
Then there's no one to leave. No one came, no one to leave. No one speaking. No one speaking.
Yeah.
Seems to be, isn't it? It's what it is.
No one who just left is subject to the vagaries of the British transport system on Easter weekend.
It's just a thought.
Of course. Nothing that is apparently happening could possibly be any other way. And again, I hope that that is one of the most staggeringly obvious things that anyone could say, and yet the self may fight against that desperately, because this is an insult to the stories that the self holds dear.
That's all about the past. What about nothing in the future will ever be different to the way it is? That's a bit cheeky, isn't it? Because
that is that's more of an assault on what the person believes them to be, because, you know, most persons, not all of them, but most persons acknowledge that they cannot directly alter the past, but most persons believe that they can have an influence on the future. So it's a terrible insult. It can be taken as it's not a terrible insult, but it can be taken as a terrible insult. But then this is an insult to every story of meaning and purpose. Every story of meaning and purpose rests on the fundamental foundation stone that there is a self, and that self possesses something called will and something called choice, and something called the possibility of influencing something else called the future. And all of that collapses in the seeing of this. This is why mystics in the church who saw this had to be killed in the days where the church was able to kill its enemies. In spite of the fact that we're sitting in a room with somebody sitting at the front, and this is so goddamn important, this meeting, that we're even filming it, di-da, in spite of that, you know, this overthrows all teachers, it overthrows all gurus, it overthrows all teachings, it overthrows all sacred works. It renders all of that irrelevant. It overthrows all institutions. It overthrows priests and monks and abbots. It overthrows rituals. It overthrows chanting and japa and meditation and arati and karma and dharma and rebirth and God. It overthrows it all. No wonder it is taken as such a deadly insult by certain people.
And I've got a big smile on. As you went on, my smile got bigger.
Great.
Well, I mean, it has been, you know, I've been in a lot of despair, but I would say there's not so much now, more laughter, more just not taking things so seriously, seems to be striving hard, to be working at things, and then at the end of the day, or whenever some moments just stop, there just seems to be sort of, oh, it's okay.
Maybe, I don't know, but maybe some of that smile or some of that laughter might be partly to do with the recognition that it is only in the overthrow of all of these things I've just listed that there is any freedom. Every single one of the things I've just listed is a prison. It's a straitjacket. Actually, the very sense of being separate, the very sense of being a person is a prison. It's the core, basic prison. And then all these other things that I've listed, all these holy books and beliefs and teachers and gurus and swamis, etc., etc., they're just prisons added on top of the prison. So maybe that smile is partly about the recognition that this is what we're talking about. It is the only possible freedom, and it's freedom from. It's not freedom to do anything. It's not even freedom to enter a fourth dimension when we're put in prison by the police, and so that they find us the next day sitting hairy and naked on the top of the prison roof to their confoundment. Even though the same thing happened last month, apparently, over and over again. It's not freedom to do anything at all. It's freedom from. It's freedom from the curse of being a person.
Freedom in emptiness.
Freedom in emptiness and fullness. It's both. It's the recognition of emptiness and fullness.
You described it, I think, last time before. The worst thing for someone is to be ignored.
Oh, yes, I was talking, yeah, in a way.
So this is really what that same feeling is, just paying no attention to all these things, priests or the rest of it, the holy work. Giving no, recognising nothing about it, any consequence. So that would be insulting.
Well, it's terribly insulting, of course, to the priests and the holy books, of course it is, yeah. It's not really you paying no attention to it, it's more that with the disappearance of you, the ability to take these stories seriously dies, as it's seen that it's just empty. And the gibberings of priests are just empty mouthings.
Again, I was using a green box, that would be how it was here.
I've forgotten whether it's the green box or the red box that's got the chocolate in it now.
There you are.
It's funny when you say this is just an empty show, but me can't see that. I just can't see that. It sounds kind of right, but I can't see that.
No, that's the point. No, the one, as long as we have that sense of separation, that sense of meanness, of course, we can't see that. If this is seen as an empty show from the position of the one who feels separate, that probably goes along with some kind of intense feeling of existential despair or something like that. It's, it may be a kind of symptom of acute depression or something, yeah. There's a world of difference between saying from, if you like, the perspective of non-duality, you know, this has no meaning. It's kind of just blindingly obvious it has no meaning. It doesn't need to have any meaning. That's very different from the person in a state of acute depression saying there is no meaning to life. It's a world of difference.
But there may be meaning, but it's unknowable if there's no one to know it.
I'm not sure what the difference would be between an unknowable meaning and no meaning, so I'm just going to let that one lie.
Well, let's say it again.
No, please don't.
No, really, if there is no one here, who's to say if there's a meaning or not? You know?
Well, if you're happy with that,
I'm
happy with it.
There has to be someone to have meaning, though.
That's what I thought. And if there, I don't know that. That's the theory.
You see, what I'll add is maybe what I've often added about that. But when I say, you know, why is there is no meaning? Why is it not a statement of nihilism or despair, as it would be if said, if you like, by someone else or in a different tone of voice or in a different place? Because what's seen is there is no meaning because there doesn't need to be, because this is already so full in itself. A leaf is already so full as a leaf. I can't remember if it was during the talk before tea, if it was in the tea break, someone was talking about just seeing a leaf, you know, the beauty of seeing a leaf. You know, a leaf is so full in itself, there is no room. This is so full in itself, there's no room for meaning to be added, if you like. That's why this can sometimes, if you like, you know, to the untutored mind, this can sound nihilistic, but it absolutely isn't.
So nihilism is for the person.
I would say so.
Yeah. And no meaning is for not a person.
Well, if you like, nihilism, it seems to me, is a philosophy that can... First, it's a philosophy, which this isn't, and secondly, it seems to me a philosophy which can only be held by one who feels himself to be a person, and who feels that there is something called life, and it is meaningless when it should have meaning, and that's so... It's in a different universe to what we're talking about. I've never heard a nihilist describe this as being full of unconditional love. So seeing that this is full of unconditional love absolutely mitigates against a nihilistic point of view. And also the clues maybe in that last phrase, nihilism is a point of view. It's a philosophical point of view. This isn't. I mean, I often kind of refer to existentialism. There are some similarities between what we're talking about here and existentialism, only up to a certain point, because existentialism is a point of view and it's a philosophy. This is neither. We can make a philosophy out of this and we can attach a point of view to it, but that's to misunderstand it. As I've said over and over and over again, this is an attempt, always a failed attempt, to describe something. Not to philosophise, but to describe something.
A meaning implies something else.
Yeah.
Additional.
Always added on, always added on.
Well,
that's what I mean. This is already so full of simply what it is that there isn't any room for meaning.
It doesn't arise.
It doesn't arise. It can't arise.
I prefer unconditionality rather than unconditional love.
You prefer it?
I don't like it.
Oh, well, have it then. You have unconditionality. I'm not here as some tyrant trying to force unconditional love of anyone. Unconditionality is great. Yeah. Nevertheless, insofar as seeing this as full can be described, which is not very far at all, but insofar as we seek for words to describe it, knowing that we must fail, I'm going to sit here and stick with love's the closest word we can get to. And if you don't like that, that's fine.
Richard, can I ask you a question about choice? When you say that we do not have choice.
I'm not saying that you do not have choice. I'm saying that the one who seems to have choice does not exist. So that's very different.
So, why, the way I see it is like, for example, we can have a vision and we can strive to bring that vision to reality. And you can end up having different end results. So I see that we've got different choices to engage ourselves and bring different realities. Wouldn't that be a choice?
I would say that that is a very good way of describing a very important aspect of what it feels like to be a person and to be separate. That's absolutely a very good description. And for many, many years in air, inverted commas, this, probably like that and like many others in the room, fully believed and fully felt that that was precisely what life consisted of. Here am I, separate, living in this stuff called life, and I have certain choices I can make, and in making these choices I can bring about different possible futures, and the choices that I make may be informed by my vision of what I would like the future to be, just as you've suggested. So at a certain point, I'd use a hypothetical example here rather than a real one. At a certain point, I might feel like I would like to dedicate my life to saving people's lives through surgery. And so I choose a certain educational path and I go to medical school, and 5-10 years later I end up as a surgeon. Absolutely, this is the story of a person, and what I'm proposing, astonishingly and maybe revolutionarily, is that all of that is an empty appearance. All of it is just an empty appearance. It is possible, even in just a split second of seeing that this is empty, that none of that, I'll just use a common or garden phrase, none of that is in actuality for real. It's a story, it's a belief, if you like. It's more than a story and a belief, it's a story and a belief that has very strong feelings attached to it. And these feelings give it the appearance of absolute reality. And the suggestion from here is all of that can just collapse. And it can be recognised there was never anybody who chose to study physics and biology A-level because they wanted to be a surgeon. That is simply something which apparently happened in this fiction called The Story of My Life. That's the suggestion from here. It's like going back to what I was saying, I think, to James earlier. There's a cosmic gulf between there is no one who chooses, and on the one hand, which is what I'm saying, and there is somebody who is helpless to choose. There is somebody who doesn't have a choice, who's just forced to do. There's a huge gulf between those two statements. So what I'm saying is there is no one who ever chose to follow a vision to create, let's say, a better version of reality in the future. And this is, again, a reason why what is said in non-duality, if you like, can be taken as such an insult to so many of our shared cultural and moral and ethical stories and opinions, because it strikes at the very heart of them. I mean, if what's being said here is really heard, it destroys all of that. It destroys meaning and purpose, virtue, morality, higher and lower, spiritual and unspiritual. It destroys all of that. There's just this, and then we can add to this any description of a bit that we like, and the description, we add to it, will also just be this. So there's just this, and now let's add to it the story that because we're all particularly noble and virtuous people, we are particularly guided by God. And that's still just this. That story is still just this. It's just what's arising. There is always only whatever's happening. And that may include stories of meaning and purpose and choice and responsibility.
So
I don't know if I should tell this anecdote, particularly on camera, but then
Turn it off.
No, it's all right. I was going to say it's probably not working, and even if it is, I'll probably never be able to get it off the camera or on the computer because my technical skills are so low. So I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I was once I must have been in a very, I don't know, taken by surprise about it. I was once at a green camp, an ecological camp. I mean, I wasn't there for ecological reasons, I was there for different reasons, because I sort of enjoyed being there. I got into conversation with somebody who lived in a commune in Northumberland, very nice, but me and my girlfriend got into this conversation, and she was very nice, and a nice conversation. Anyway, then a friend of hers who also lived in the commune came along and joined in, and she was horrible. You know, she was really up herself and full of virtue and morality and and very green. And I can't remember what the hell I said. I must have said something really off. I've no idea what. She suddenly turned on me and she said, "Don't you want to save the planet?" And I couldn't stop myself. Before I even knew what I was saying, I said, "I don't give a fuck about saving the planet." It's kind of in a way. I have no idea why I'm telling you so.
Nor do we.
Nor do you. Let's see if we can weave something relevant out of it. If not, we fail. I mean, to be honest, at the time, that probably wasn't even true. I mean, she just, you know, there was something so smug about her, it just kind of got my goat. But it's about stories, it's about meaningful stories. They, as long as, bit of a tautology, as long as we feel they're important, they just seem so goddamn important to us. You know, we're saving the planet, or we're winning souls for Christ, or whatever. I mean, it must be obvious that throughout a great deal of human history, in inverted commas, and indeed still today, you know, many of us are willing to slaughter people simply because they don't share our particular opinion about the story that makes life meaningful. It's so important to us, it's so much a part of what we feel ourselves to be. So what we're talking about here is both an insult, it is a deadly insult to all of that. It's an insult to God and it's an insult to the devil, to both. Better to believe in the devil than not to have any belief at all, many people would perhaps feel. It's both an insult and it's also the only freedom, as I said before. There is no other possible freedom. Every other freedom that we talk about is slavery compared to this. That sounds a bit melodramatic. I feel I should justify slavery to whom or to what? Slavery to a story, slavery to an idea, slavery to a religion, slavery to an ideology. This is the only freedom. I quoted before, I regret that I can't remember who wrote this because it's so lovely. I would like to give him or her the accolade for writing it. There is something of the breath of freedom blowing through Advaita. It's lovely that. There's something of the breath of freedom. It's the only freedom.
The dominant story at the moment is that the world is, the oceans are dying, the climate is changing, etc., etc. And it's a story we hear every day. And a lot of people, for instance me, when I see it, I feel awful. I feel awful about this, you know. But do you think that's just...
Do something about it.
He doesn't give a fuck.
But Yeah, I don't know. It just seems. Do you think it's just like the same as the stories? Just a similar story to what we used to have in the religious past, when we used to be made to feel awful about our sins and all this kind of. I think it's just a similar thing, the equivalent of today.
In a sense, yes, of course. In a sense, yes. In another sense, I don't really want to go down this road, I hope for obvious reasons, but in another sense I think we could say, well, the religious stories are clearly and obviously mythological, unless you don't think they are, of course, which I wouldn't necessarily say about the story that you just talked about. So in that sense, I mean, I would say, let's take the heat out of this, let's take the drama out of it and kind of reduce the importance. You know, is there a difference between being saved from my sins by faith in the sweet Lord Jesus and a cup of Pepsi Cola? Yes, there is. I can drink a cup of Pepsi Cola. So in that sense, there is a difference between a myth and reality.
That's presuming that the death of the oceans and global warming is reality.
That is presuming that, yeah, I don't want to get into, it's too late in the day
Yes.
to get into the possibility that that is all conspiracy theory.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I don't, but it's too late to go down that path. To be honest, if you put that up at 2:10, I'd have still said it was too late. I'd have found a different excuse not to talk about it.
Richard, family. Just about the choices and different results from different choices. I think I remember you saying that you were learning German a little bit. Presumably that was a vision. Just when you were, I think a few months ago, you may have said it to me, that you asked if you spoke German and you said, yes, you were doing a bit. Maybe you're not. If so, I apologise. But if you were...
I usually say I know about 8 words of German, none of which are remotely useful.
Okay. Well, any endeavour then. Writing a book.
Yeah. Which I have been doing.
Let's take the book. There are obviously choices taken and actions taken that will result in different... There's no choice, it just arises.
Of course.
Well, okay, it looks like a choice, but there are
it may look like a
possibilities,
choice.
but it just arises.
Yeah, of
So-
course.
It still happens, is all I'm...
Apparently it still happens, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, it both happens and it doesn't. It's
That's
both
all
real
right.
and it's unreal. All of these paradoxes. But to get back to the point about choice, yes, it may appear to involve choice, but it doesn't. It just arises.
No,
Yeah, I have been choicelessly writing a book in coffee bars whose locations have choicelessly arisen.
Cups of coffee.
With cups of coffee which have choicelessly appeared. Yeah.
Well, lingo's good.
Why could you not apply the same principle that you can, there is thought but not thinker?
There is. Yeah.
So does that not apply to choice takes place, but there isn't that one who assumes it is choosing?
You could say that. What I usually say at this point is, oh, look, it's 5 o'clock. What I usually say at this point is, if we look at this kind of in terms of, the everyday, the waking dream, if we want to call it that, of course, decisions take place. By the way, we could talk about this outside the context of non-duality. We could talk about this within the context, for example, of the new neuroscience, which is very much challenging the idea of free will and choice. But if we think of the everyday, of course, decisions are apparently made. We go to a restaurant, shall I have the fish, shall I have the meat? I think I'll have the fish. No, I'll have the meat. So a decision is made, right? Whether you apply the word choice to that and in what sense you apply it is in a sense up to you, with the recognition. And I'm kind of talking from the point of view of both non-duality and the new neuroscience, and the kind of philosophical dismantling of free will, which could be done very simply as well. A decision is made. Do you use the word choice for that? Well, not in the sense it's up for you. A decision is made, but there's no one in there who's made the decision.
Okay, so you're
The
using
neuroscience.
choice and decision synonymously.
Not for me, they're not.
Oh, I see.
No,
Okay.
no, they're not.
That's helpful because I would have done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's fine. I mean, if it works for you, that's absolutely fine. But you see, what I would ask you, and I could ask you this question from, as I say, from the perspective of the neuroscience, as well as the perspective of non-duality, is what does it mean to say that a choice has been made when it's kind of obvious that there's no chooser? You see. Now, one of the neuroscientists might say, okay, so will it be the fish, will it be the meat? I'll have the fish. No, I'll have the meat. I order the meat. The neuroscientist might say, so in what sense is that a choice when we can show that what happened in the brain was that the meat was chosen before there was anything there that was conscious of that? And it was only perhaps 3 seconds after the brain had chosen the meat that became conscious of the desire to have meat. The neuroscientist might say, well, okay, a decision was made, but the decision was made unconsciously by the brain. So in what sense are we saying that was a choice? You say it was a choice. So that's all I can say about that. You know, for me, there is quite a big distinction between saying there was a choice and simply a decision was made.
I've got an answer.
Oh, right.
There's no choice because we get trained or influenced by parents initially, then schooling teachers. We get programmed.
Yeah.
We're like a living program.
Yeah.
Brain, subconscious, it's programmed. And everything happens from that in life.
Yeah. Well, there you're going into the, I don't know if we've got time to do this, there you're going into the other way of demolishing choice and free will, which is, you know, the philosophical and logical way. You know, everything is either determined or it's random. If it's determined, then it's determined by genes and by conditioning.
Yeah.
As you've just said, everything's determined or it's random. If it's completely determined, clearly there's no free will or choice. If it's not completely determined, there are only two other possibilities. It's either partly determined and partly random, or it's wholly random. But a choice, in inverted commas, that is made partly or wholly at random is not a choice involving free will in any meaningful philosophical sense. So we could say, well, it doesn't matter whether I'll use the word decision, whether our decisions are wholly determined by nature and nurture, partly determined and partly random, or wholly random. It doesn't make any difference because in none of those cases can free will or choice come into play.
Okay.
So I absolutely, if that's what, I think, you know, I totally agree with what you just said. I'll just add, by the way, of course, nobody actually believes that everything happens completely at random. That's absurd. It just doesn't fit with our experience at all. Not even people in the most extreme throes of psychosis probably believe that everything happens at random. But, you know, we need to put that in to make the argument complete.
So just to understand the way decision might occur, that's what that lady discussed said. Meet what you said about neuroscience. Do the two
Yes.
merge? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, in other words, yeah, absolutely.
Where do feelings come into this?
Wherever you want. Where would you like them to come? Feelings are phenomena arise. Cups of tea arise, the sound of a voice asking or making a statement about conditioning arises, a feeling of happiness arises, or a feeling of boredom, or a feeling of sorrow arises. It's another phenomenon. They are more phenomenal.
Very powerful.
Very powerful. Overwhelming, incredibly powerful. Yes. Yeah. And in the seeing of this, likely to be experienced even more powerfully. Yeah. Because likely to be experienced in a more raw form. Yeah. Yeah. So no one feels sorrow like a Zen master, no one feels anger like a Zen master, no one feels love like a Zen master. Obviously I'm using the term Zen master as a kind of shorthand, because that was the original quote. Yeah, absolutely. Feelings are like everything else that arises, phenomena. Yeah. And just as the leaf is likely to be experienced, I want to use, I don't know, I think I've been taken over, but I think I've been so blasphemous this afternoon that now I've been taken over by some holy person I have to compensate. I want to say that just as a leaf is experienced in its utter purity for the first time when it's seen with no one there to see it, so anger is perhaps felt for the first time in its purity, uncontaminated by neurosis, when there's no one there to experience it. Now, bearing in mind that we are overrunning, will that do for that?
So that's direct perception, or
That's direct perception, we could say. Yeah, it's a nice phrase. Yeah. Will that do? Okay. Okay, guys. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
being here.